Hello, my name is Niall McKay and welcome to Living with PSC, a podcast about the rare disease of primary sclerosing cholangitis. Now, PSC causes the bile ducts inside and outside the liver to become scarred, narrowed and eventually blocked, and leads to liver cirrhosis. In this podcast, we aim to dispel some of the myths about the disease. Today we're talking to Dr. Cyriel Ponsioen about fecal microbiota transplants, or FMT. Now, fecal transplants is the procedure whereby doctors take fecal matter from a healthy colon, add saline, and transfer it to an unhealthy colon. The purpose of fecal transplants is to replace the bad bacteria with good bacteria. Now, it seems to have an over 90% success rate for infections such as C. diff, and now it has been used for diseases such as Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Dr. Ponsioen has been investigating its effectiveness for PSC. But first, let's talk about your areas of expertise, Dr. Ponsioen.
Well, I'm an associate professor of gastroenterology and hepatology. I work as a senior staff member at the Academic Medical Center in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And I have a special interest research-wise in primary sclerosing cholangitis, on which I did my PhD thesis in the 90s. So I'm involved in PSC research for over 20 years now, and in inflammatory bowel disease, and especially the link, the association between the gut and the bile ducts has my special interest.
Often with liver disease, people treat it as a mechanical issue, as indeed I suppose it is, because it's a blockage, if you like, a mechanical issue. And certainly the area that you're working in is more of a biochemical area, if you like, or a biochemical issue, so it's more of a chemistry problem, if you like, than a mechanical problem. I just wondered if you'd like to tell us a little bit about the difference of, if that is your experience, or how you think about the disease.
Yeah, I see your point. I would rather make another distinction as a liver disease, and that's also because it's mainly treated and taken care of by hepatologists, and they think from the liver into the bile duct, so to say, but by other people, it is regarded as an inflammatory disease, a sort of autoimmune inflammatory disease, or an autoimmune disbalance disease, in analogy to ulcerative colitis or a Crohn's disease of the colon, which is quite often associated. And so from that point of view, it is being perceived as a disease that comes from the bowel and not from the liver itself. And there are only very few people who are active in both sides of the spectrum, of which I tend to call myself one of them, because I approach it from the liver side and from the bile duct side with and there you come up with a blockage, because that's where we do ERCPs and try to alleviate blockage and narrowings. But also from the inflammatory bowel disease part, which I am very much involved in, because I'm also an IBD specialist, and then I run two busy outpatient clinics that are mainly populated by inflammatory bowel disease patients and PSC patients, the majority of which also have inflammatory bowel disease. And my point is that I think in order to advance the fields in PSC with regard to gaining knowledge about how the disease goes, but also what the causes are, what the pathogenesis are, is that you have to look to it in a holistic way, and not only regard it from either the liver or either the bowel, but both. I think that's very important, and that's what I'm trying to do, and that's also what I'm trying to pursue with the research lines we have in my group.
That's very interesting, yeah. And can you explain to us just a little bit about the mechanics of the disease as you understand it, in terms of how something that starts in the bowel, if you like, or in both areas, can end up as a restriction in the bile duct?
Yes, well, this is for now. It's still all speculation. We have some hypotheses how we think that things can evolve in this disease, but they have not been proven at all. So it's still speculative. But if you don't formulate hypotheses and try to pursue them to see if there is any truth in them, you will never get anywhere. So it's okay to speculate. And one of the ideas is that there is some agents, be it a microorganism or be it a couple of microorganisms or some products from microorganisms that are able to enter the bloodstream from the bowel to the liver and are not processed in the normal way in the liver, where they can be made innocuous or harmless, but can evade that surveillance in the liver itself, and then get to the bile ducts and there give their harmful effects on the bile ducts, which could either be an inflammatory injury, which then leads to inflammation, and later on to when the body tries to cure that inflammation, to scarring, and the scarring leads then to narrowing, and also gives rise in later on in disease stages to scarring of the liver tissue itself, leading to fibrosis and in the end cirrhosis. And that's one idea. Another idea is that there is a sort of a common injury which not only injures the bowel tissue, the large bowel tissue, but also the bile duct tissue. Apparently there is in some patients, or maybe the majority of patients, there is a genetic predisposition, which means that they produce, and also in their bowel, some proteins that are apparently allergens for the body itself. So it gets attacked by the body itself, both in the bowel and in the bile duct. So that hypothesis is based on a common autoantigen that is being attacked, which happens to be in the bowel and in some patients also in the bile ducts. And then there is one other hypothesis, that is the toxic bile salt hypothesis, which means that in the formation of bile in PSC patients, something is wrong, either in the formation of the bile or in the protective mechanisms that are present in the bile ducts, and which are very necessary in any individual to protect yourself from the very potent chemical detergent action of bile. And somehow in patients with PSC, this is defective, so that the bile itself can be a chemical irritant to the bile ducts. But the difficulty with that hypothesis is that it leaves out the very prominent association with inflammatory bowel disease.
And that's in fact saying that the bile itself is infected.
No, it's in fact saying that this latter theory is in fact saying that patients with PSC have a defective protective mechanism in place in their bile ducts, so that their own bile is toxic to them.
Oh, I see.
You don't need an infection for that.
I see. Now, we're here, of course, to talk about FMT. Would you like to explain to us what FMT is?
Yes. FMT is, in fact, is an abbreviation for Fecal Microbiota Transplantation, or we like to say transfer nowadays, which means that you try to transplant a healthy microbiota, so a collection of bacteria from a healthy donor to a recipient which is suffering from some form of disease, in which you think that a dysbiosis of the bowel is involved in causing as a causative factor in this disease. This has been done for ages now. The first report on FMT was in the 4th century AD in China, where a respectful professor of medicine called Gi Hong advocated to take when you have a severe diarrhea, the healthy stool of your neighbor, and then it's cured. And that was already more than 1600 years ago. In the past 20 or 30 years, it used to become more popular for a disease called Clostridium difficile associated diarrhea, which is a big health burden in hospitals where patients are infected with Clostridium difficile, which can give a very nasty diarrhea and patients can die of it. It's a disease that is difficult to treat because the bacterium is very resistant to all kinds of detergents and antiseptics, and it also becomes more and more resistant to antibiotics. And the way this disease evolves is that normally this bacteria is very indolent, but when you have a severe dysbiosis in your bowel because of antibiotics, you wipe away a lot of your indigenous microbiota. Then sometimes this bacterium can give very bad diarrhea, and when you treat that with antibiotics, often the bacteria goes away, but the antibiotics lead to even more dysbiosis, so that the bacteria can come again and then lead to so-called refractory disease. And when you treat this with a stool donation from a healthy donor, which has a rich microbiota, then in more than 90% of the cases, the disease is cured within a few days. And from our center, from the AMC, the first randomized trial, which was published 5 years ago now in the New England Journal of Medicine, showed that clearly, and since then it has become standard of care, maybe not as a first-line therapy, but as a third-line therapy, and it's very effective. And one of the spin-offs of that is that since it proved to be quite safe, that people started trying to use this treatment in several other diseases. There are some case reports of the efficacy of FMT in ulcerative colitis, and that prompted us in 2011 to start a formal clinical trial in ulcerative colitis in our center in the AMC to compare the effects of donor stool FMT with placebo stool, so the patient's own stool, for moderately active ulcerative colitis. That was published in 2015 in Gastroenterology, and the trial was negative on its primary endpoint, which was clinical remission at 3 months. But in the trial, there were a number of patients who had a extremely good reaction and told me, "Doc, you cured me." And I have 5 cases of that, and they got off all their medication and got their life back. And I asked them to come with a big smile and tell me, "Doc, you cured me." And I said, "Oh, I'll come back next year and we'll see about that." But so far, it's now 5 to 6 years down the road. They still tell me, "Doc, you cured me." So I'm getting pretty much convinced that somehow in a number of patients, there is a very good response to this treatment, and that has initiated a second trial where we try to improve the therapy by teasing out which factors we think have done the trick in these 5 patients and not in the majority of the other patients.
That's down to where the microbia comes from, is quote unquote healthy microbia and not so healthy microbia that certain
Yes.
Did you trace that down to the donor microbia, those people recording all from one donor was it? Or
Yeah, there was one. We had one super donor who had very good results in 50% of the patients, but we didn't have so many donors that donated more than 3 or 4 times to different patients. So for that, the trial was too limited in numbers to really tease out that. But what we did do was, of course, look at the composition of the microbiota, as we tend to call it, before and after the procedure. Especially in the ones that tell me, "Doc, you still cured me," and we found a number of interesting signals, interesting groups of bacteria who seem to be important in establishing a new and more homeostatic, which is also known as harmonious crosstalk between them and the immunological defense of the bone to rest. So we do have an idea of which bacteria or which groups of bacteria are important in that, and we also have an idea of which bacteria could be detrimental, and that's not. It's not that we think, okay, these diseases are infectious diseases and it is this bug that's causing the disease and you should make sure you get this bug out. But it's more that groups of bugs produce certain chemicals that are able to reduce and bring down inflammation, whereas others produce pro-inflammatory substances that are speeding up inflammation. And if you can change the indigenous microbiota, which is dysbiotic, so it's not normal microbiota in these patients, and exchange it for a healthy microbiota, which is able to hatch and grow out and engraft, then you can reach this result.
And is there any way other than fecal transplants that people can encourage these good microbiota, if you like, in their stomachs, or to create those good bacterium?
Not yet, but we are looking into that. Of course, what you could expect is that diet is important, because bacteria are not growing voluntary. They're just passive bugs that can grow out when the conditions to grow out are optimal for them, and that is for probably for a large part dependent on what nutrients they get, and that depends, of course, on what you eat. So we think that eating a lot of fibers, non-digestible fibers that contain high doses of short-chain fatty acids is important. Because these non-digestible starch components and fibers are fermented and digested by some of the beneficial bacteria groups into short-chain fatty acids, and these short-chain fatty acids are known already for their dampening effect on inflammation. So that's one issue. There's some vitamins that seem to play a role, but I think the main factor that can be pivotal in this is change the microbiota, and the only radical way to do this currently is by doing an FMT.
When you talk about that, so you're talking about basically more green vegetables, I suppose, is that?
More green vegetables, less meat.
And I believe that the donors as well are often the best donors are perhaps vegetarian.
Yeah, we don't know that yet, but I can tell you that in our new trial, the Turn 2 trial, we will encourage our donors to eat vegetarian and with lots of fibers and all that, because we think it's beneficial, but it's not enough. I mean, I know in my practice some patients either with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, and they tell me when I eat a very strict vegetarian or sometimes even vegan diet, I have no complaints and I can do without my medication. And when I go on holiday and I eat McDonald's burgers, then my disease flares up and I have to take the bloody medication you prescribed me. So there is in individual patients there is a very strong relationship, but on the whole, just changing your diet is not enough to get your inflammatory bowel disease under control, let alone PSC.
I understand that, but I think often medicine looks for a single cure, whereas um, kind of like all environmental matters, driving a Prius is good, but it's not the only thing you can do. It's a constellation of things that you need to do, like diet and exercise. But I do find it interesting. I mean, when you're talking about, can you explain to me like the sort of mechanics of bile, like what happens when you eat a big pork chop, what the mechanics of the bile production is in that?
Yeah, we don't know that for sure, but the bile production is mainly driven by fat, because that is the main function of bile, is helping in digesting fat. So when you eat a fat meal, let's say a big burger or a chopsticks, then you get a signal from the small bowel, the upper small bowel, which is called duodenum, which releases cholecystokinin, which is a hormone that will make your gallbladder contract, so that a lot of bile goes out in the small bowel to help digest that. But in terms of whether the production of bile in the liver itself or the composition of bile into the various different bile acids and phospholipids and other components of bile is altered by different food, that is still a area of research which is very in its infancy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think many patients would say that they feel better when they eat less fat.
Yeah, but that's, I think, a mechanical problem, because if you have a stricture down below in your bile duct, and you eat fat, and the gallbladder contracts, and a lot of bile has to come down and has to press itself through the narrowing, then it's easy to understand, I would say.
Yeah, because the narrowing, you're basically putting high pressure through a small valve, if you like you're like standing on a hose,
exactly.
a garden hose. I do understand that doctors are very wary of saying, like, diet is not a cure; it's a help. But it is certainly, as you said, it's kind of a mechanical problem. But in terms of FMT, have you identified some of the bad bacteria does? Like what? Because I know, say, for heart disease and stuff like that, they're beginning to identify some of the bad bacteria and saying this bad bacteria plus this bad bacteria creates a third, agent that can hurt your heart, essentially. Is it the same? Are we zeroing in on these things for PSC?
No, I think that's way too early to say that. In PSC, I think we don't know, we have no idea what the bacteria exactly do. I told you that we think that some peptides or proteins that are made by bacteria and are known to be to elicit a pro-inflammatory response. So a lot of inflammation, a lot of inflammatory cells are being attracted when these compounds from certain bacteria enter the body. That may play a role, but there's no proof whatsoever that is the case. And also, we don't know which bacteria exactly could be instrumental in causing the. So far, I think the data on FMT in PSC are very limited. We did a study. There's a study from Norway. There's a study from England. And I believe there's one from the United States, and there's one. But that's observational. We looked at PSC patients with also ulcerative colitis, and we compared them with patients with only ulcerative colitis and with healthy controls. And then you see, depending on the on the country, you see some bacterial groups popping up as either beneficial or maybe harmful. But that is only an association. That doesn't mean that these bacteria themselves are the the bad guys, because one should realize that each individual has between 200 and 500 different bacterial species in his bowel, with a total of 1 to 10 trillion bacteria. And so if you see one bacteria popping out, it could mean that this bacteria is indeed a causative factor, but it could also mean that you're looking at a network of bacteria that is highlighted by this bacterium, but it's in fact one of the other bacteria, or maybe 3 or 4 of the other bacteria that are mandatorily connected to that bacterium, that are really the bad guys and doing the bad work, and this other bacteria is just a red flag telling us something is wrong here. So we don't know which bacteria exactly are involved in PSC, if any. And when you go down 1 or 2 steps, or go back 1 or 2 steps and say, so what about ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease then? Because that's easier to study. First of all, it's much more prevalent, and you can reach the organ of interest very easily with endoscopy and take samples. So we're trying to tease out which bacterial groups are really involved. And as I told you, we're getting closer, but even in those diseases, we don't know yet.
How much evidence is there with the PSC patients with it helping?
Oh, well, at this moment, there's very little evidence. There's one single-arm study going on, or maybe they completed it already, but there's no published results yet, in which I did in Boston, and we are planning one this year, hopefully by the end of this year, in AMC FMT Center, but the data so far is purely from a number of observational studies that say, okay, there is a dysbiosis in PSC patients, which is also different from the dysbiosis which is seen in ulcerative colitis patients. So it seems to be really a phenomenon of its own, belonging to the PSC and not to the ulcerative colitis. And maybe there is that is part of the link between the bowel and the biliary tree, so that we should pursue that, and which is what we want to do, given the fact that we have so much experience with FMT for inflammatory bowel disease and other diseases in our center already.
And I talked recently to Dr. Gideon Hirschfield at the University of Birmingham. I think they said that they were going to start a trial pretty soon as well.
Yes, yeah, I know that they applied for funding for a trial, and it would be great if he got the funding and could start the trial.
I wonder, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you, or anything that you want to add?
What about the YAC factor? When I started the ulcerative colitis FMT trial, which was called Turn 1, my biggest fear was that nobody would want to participate because everybody would have high levels of YAC factor. But actually, it turns out that it was the opposite. I encountered many patients from literally all over the world when the trial was put on the clinicaltrials.gov that wanted to participate and wanted to get rid of all the bad in their eyes bad medications with all the side effects, and wanted to have this natural therapy. So it was very striking. I have done many clinical trials, and this trial was the only trial where I had no issues with recruitment whatsoever. Plus, the way we administer the donor stool is by a tube which we introduce through the nose all the way into the small bowel, so beyond the stomach, and which means that you don't see it, you don't smell it, you don't feel it, nothing.
I wondered just whether or not you had experience with URSO.
I'm a little bit ambivalent about the about URSO. We've done a lot of research in the evidence that URSO is really helping to halt disease progression. And despite 20 years of research and several trials, that has not been proven yet. Now, none of these trials was adequately powered to show a benefit, so it might be that there's still benefit, but it wasn't just simply not picked up because the trial design or the numbers of patients recruited were not large enough. But at least we don't have a very favorable signal for URSO so far. What we do know is that quite a lot of patients respond to URSO not only biochemically, but also with in terms of their complaints. The pruritus goes less, becomes less. The fatigue may regress to some extent. So it can do really something with regard to symptoms. And for patients who are symptomatic, I really tend to prescribe it, and if it works, then I continue it. But if it doesn't work, I'm not. I don't prescribe it to any patient just because we think, okay, it will slow, because there proof of this so far. But I know that this debate is still going on. There are colleagues who prescribe it to every patient. There are countries where it's not prescribed anymore, and so I'm somewhere in between. One of the notions we had the other day, last Friday and Saturday, when we had the Emerging Trends conference in Washington, or actually in Arlington, was that probably the way to go forward is in combination therapy, that we have to try to bring down the inflammation and bring down the elevated pressure and bring down the toxic effects of bile acids on the biliary tree with a combination of drugs. But well, first we have to find out which are drugs that are really doing something in itself, and then combine them.
Cyriel, thank you very much. You've been really great, and I look forward to following up with you at some stage.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this week. For more information about PSC and for a list of people and topics we'll be covering in the near future, please go to www.pscpartners.org. That's www.pscpartners.org. PSC Partners is a non-profit organisation dedicated to providing education and support to primary sclerosing cholangitis patients. There is information and resources on the website. There is a conference once a year. There is a private Facebook group that you can also join. Also, please join our patient registry. This is an anonymous database that provides research support to the medical community who are researching this disease. Thank you very much for listening.